Block Party DFS show, week 6 GPP breakdown with Jmtowin from 1 week season. We'll do a slate overview. We'll go position by position with JM's favorite DFS plays this week. And then we'll wrap up with a lineup build on DraftKings to give you ideas for your own lineup building, not to dupe us. It's not the only lineup. I'm giving these caveats early today. It is the Block Party DFS show. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, close spot bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right. Hey, everyone. Hey, JM. Week 6. How we feeling?
Feeling good, man. Did you get distracted in your intro by me moving my chair around and trying to figure out my seating situation? Yeah, feeling good. Not quite as exciting of a week as we had last week. We're just set up really well from a strategy perspective, but kind of similar in that there are some games that could shoot out and that could separate a lot from the others, but then also some ways that you can win the slate if no games shoot out that are very different from the ways that if the games shoot out. So, and then lots of kind of strange value opening up on the slate, not like 3K, wide receivers or 4,500 running backs, but just like lots of injury situations where a number 2 wide receiver is becoming a number 1 or a number 3 is becoming a number 2, or some guys entering the rotation. So yeah, just lots to play around with this week.
Yeah. And like JM mentions, one of the dynamics we're always kind of dealing with here is like the flurry of Friday afternoon news is coming in almost directly as we record this. So there are going to be some moving pieces, specifically if you're listening to this on playback, on Saturday. A lot has changed. So by then, but we are going to do our best to, wrap our heads around the slate with the information we do have. And I'll try to flag anything important if it comes across our desk. Real quick, as always, JM, week 5. How did that treat you? Any lessons learned? Any things you're looking to keep rolling in week 6?
Yeah, it was a really good week. Not a huge week of returns, but it was I feel like my first really mistake-free week of play where, some other weeks have come off it, assessed my play, and been like, here's something I should have done better or differently. So really liked the week. Had a lot of big wins for the OWS fam. Had a lot of sweats on my end. So nothing major, but good week and set up well for some of our strengths, some of our edges that we have, and now it's about hunting for the edges on this week's slate. I saw that you got another bink in the underdog streets. Is that right?
Yeah, took down one of their $100 5 max contest. So yeah, I'm running very hot on underdog. It would be nice to transfer some of that run good over to DraftKings where I'm in quite the drought. So you got to get me on the straight and narrow this week.
Let's do it. Let's hit it today. Hey, maybe you can dupe our lineup. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be exactly what you need.
I should. Maybe it's the thing where I tell everyone, don't dupe it. And then I'm the one who plays it. Maybe that's the technique. I did want to, I mentioned this on Lulz yesterday, but I got a DM. I don't know who runs the 1 week season Twitter account, but they sent me some screenshots from the 1 week season Discord, and the individual who won the Deposit Kingdom 3 max contest on DraftKings last week was an OWS member's mom. And They sent over all of her handwritten notes from the scroll, watching the block party, all of this stuff, and then took down the Deposit Kingdom contest, which we will talk about in a little bit. But look at that, man. The everyone coming together to crush the slate.
Yeah, we got love for everybody. Love seeing that. And, we've gotten to a point, Roto Maven, our COO, he and I have talked about this, of like, we really sweat our own entries quite a bit less on Sundays. We're kind of more like checking the leaderboard to see how the OWS fam is doing. So as long as the fam is doing well, we're pretty happy and our time will come. And so, maybe that's this week. If it's not for us, hopefully it's for somebody else on the site, somebody else watching this. Fun slate to dig into.
All right. And let's do exactly that and dig into this slate. I'll get the games up here just so we can kind of get a high level overview here. We do have some games with big totals. Lions Cowboys is looking good. Ravens and Commanders is looking good. Maybe some other sneaky shootouts in here. What is kind of jumping out to you from a slate overview perspective?
Yeah, the Commanders and Ravens game, very interesting, right? Who knows what the Commanders are going to be able to do here? We've seen them do really well. We've seen them overperform expectations. We've also seen the Ravens completely dominate really good teams. They did it against the Lions last year. They did it against the 49ers last year. They did it against the Bills this year. So sort of a broad range of outcomes there on the Washington side. Also, Washington has yet to produce a 24-point score from a skill position player on DraftKings. So maybe we're less worried about that side as well, because maybe that side's not going to bury us even if we ignore it. Now, that's not to say that's definitely what's going to happen. Those are some of the thoughts we can play around with. On the Baltimore side, I mean, we've got 4 out of 5 weeks with Lamar plus somebody combining for 59.5 or more DraftKings points, 59.4 or more DraftKings points. And now they're playing this Washington defense that, again, like they've had one good game, then another game where they held the scoring down, but that wasn't necessarily Washington overperforming their talent. But this looks like a spot where the Ravens are going to probably score points, right? If the Ravens aren't scoring points because they're shooting themselves in the foot or making mistakes on their end. And so we have to account for that on this slate. This Cowboys-Lions game is another one we have to account for, because the Lions, traditionally have a really good run defense. They're 19th in DVOA right now, but teams are still avoiding them on the ground. They're facing the 3rd or 4th highest opponent pass play rate. And we know that the Cowboys have a willingness over the last couple of years to say, let's just abandon the run and throw the ball. On the flip side, there's a broad range of ways that this could play out on the Lions side. They could be leaning on David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs against this Cowboys run defense that teams have been attacking, or this game could develop in such a way that Goff is throwing the ball 34, 35 times and other people are hitting. And so, and that game really, would it shock us if it's, 3 of the Lions' 4 games have been kind of lower scoring. Each of the last 2 Cowboys games have been lower scoring. It shouldn't shock us if this game combines for like 37 points or 43 points, but it also shouldn't shock us if this game combines for 70 plus. And so that's a really interesting game to think about how it affects the slate. And then there's some other spots. It's like, I guess the other one I'll highlight here is Cardinals and Packers, where it's spots where it's like, you really can't, if you understand these teams, you cannot draw up a clear scenario in which this game shoots out, where it's like 38-41, because that's not the nature of how these teams attack. And so typically you need one team pushing the game environment in order for something like that to happen. But also both these teams probably score in the 20s, and there's a shot that we get like a 28-31 type game. So if these other games don't shoot out and then that one ends up at that level, that ends up being the game that you had to have. So similar to what we talked about last week with Jordan Love and Brock Purdy, where it was like, these guys don't have 30+ point scores in their reasonable range of outcomes. But if we don't get 30-point scores other places, these guys could easily score 25 and be the quarterbacks you needed. So I kind of see that game being similar on this slate.
Those were the 3 games that jumped out to me when I quickly reviewed things earlier this week. And then what was a funny kind of revelation for me when I was starting to look at kind of optimals and best plays and what was showing up a ton, there is going to be a ton of interest in this Falcons-Panthers game, because there is value with the Falcons pass catchers. Chuba and Deontay Johnson project really well again. And so that's another wrinkle where I wonder if some of these games end up going maybe slightly overlooked more so than they would, just because there's so much value in that Falcons-Panthers game. How are you thinking about that dynamic?
Yeah, that's sort of the 4th game on my list, and there's some interesting components in how that game could play out. I mean, the Panthers have given up, it was a game of 24 points allowed, 26 points allowed, and everything else has been 30+ points allowed. And obviously the Falcons, only one game over 24 points, I believe it is. It was like 18, 21, 22, and 24 were their first 4 games. It's ascending scores throughout the season, but they've also played really tough defenses in 3 of those 4 games. And so here's the thing. It's kind of like what we saw with the Packers last week. Jordan Love coming off a 54 pass attempt game where they were trailing a bunch from the Vikings. And so everybody looks at those target numbers and the prices, and it feels like you literally have to play those guys, then it can't miss. Well, this probably isn't going to turn into a similar game environment where the Falcons are forced to be chasing points and Kirk Cousins is forced to throw the ball a ton. And so that's kind of the one thing that I would caution people on is, can Drake London hit for a tournament winning score at 6,700 if Kirk Cousins is throwing the ball 32 times, because he's kind of a Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman type guy where he needs a lot of volume most of the time in order to hit. Can Darnell Mooney hit for 25 points if Kirk Cousins is throwing the ball 32, 33 times, Ray McLeod, Kyle Pitts. And so, and even Bijan Robinson, like, how often is he going for, he's averaging like 18 touches a game, I think it is. Like, he's probably going to get about 4 or 5, maybe 6 points through the air. He's done that kind of every week, right? So what he needs to get you a tournament winning score is 100 yards and a touchdown. Can he get there against Carolina? Absolutely. But what we've seen so far is he's probably going to get 14 carries. So if he gets 14 carries, that lowers his chances of those 100 yards, that 100-yard bonus. And then he might need 2 touchdowns to get you there. So I like this spot. I'm going to be building around this spot in different ways. But I also think there's some notes of caution on this spot that, I could be inadvertently underweight the field just because I won't be quite as high on it as some other people will be.
Just to talk about a couple other teams and spots where we have some, I guess, different variables than we've had in previous weeks, and then we'll move on to quarterback. The Eagles obviously getting back their weaponry with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Curious if you're thinking about them any differently. We also have a ton of moving parts with the Colts. Jonathan Taylor officially ruled out. Anthony Richardson, a game time decision. So some stuff going on there. Obviously a change of quarterback for the Saints this week. Are there any of these spots where you're kind of changing how you've been thinking about the teams up until this point?
Yeah, I think the Eagles are really interesting. The problem with the Eagles is, I think last year, A.J. Brown had 4 games of 25.9 or more DraftKings points, and Devontae Smith had maybe 1. And they're not a team that's producing a lot of tournament winners because they've got these really expensive pieces. They kind of use all of them. If the game environment doesn't play out in such a way that they have to be attacking, then it's harder to get those 30-plus point scores. At the same time, when you look through the slate and you say, okay, who could post a score that you couldn't win without? The Eagles have pieces who can do that, and Saquon Barkley and A.J. Brown in particular. So that's a spot that I'm not going out of my way to build around, but I'm being very cognizant of and paying attention to and taking into account in the ways that I build. The Saints, we'll talk more about Spencer Rattler in the quarterback section because we'll kind of have to. He's going to be a key decision point on the slate. But one of the things that's interesting to me there is everything in the Saints offense is built off the rushing attack. And primarily it's an under center rushing attack. Spencer Rattler has really no experience under center. So how do they adapt to, him probably having to play out of the shotgun or playing under center for really the first time in, I don't know how long, maybe ever. And then, having to develop this run game with Alvin Kamara. And so, yeah, I think that it kind of changes that whole offense. And we haven't seen, there's not an adjustment in pricing on Kamara, Rashid, Olave. And now we have Spencer Rattler at quarterback. So it certainly lowers the excitement for me on those ancillary pieces on that team, the skill position pieces on that team. What was the other spot that you mentioned there?
Did I mention the Colts?
Oh, the Colts. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of the same thing as last week, right? I mean, we see this line went from Colts by 1.5 to Titans by now 3. And that's with the expectation that Anthony Richardson's playing as opposed to Joe Flacco. Well, if Joe Flacco plays, then kind of becomes a situation where you like the Colts a little bit more. And that's not throwing shade on the Colts organization, right? I think it's very clear that the Colts are a better team right now with Joe Flacco under center. But what does that do for them 2 or 3 years from now? Absolutely nothing. And they're probably not winning a Super Bowl with Flacco this year. So you got to play Richardson. You got to let him keep developing because his ceiling is high. We just don't know if he can get there. And so, if Richardson's healthy, he's going to play. That also kind of lowers the expectations for this team as a whole, makes the pass catchers less exciting. If it's Flacco, especially if Pittman, now we've got Pittman practice today. Who knows if it's limited capacity? Who knows if he's playing? It was like rumored he might go on IR. Now it's like, oh, he's practicing. So there's a lot up in the air there. But if Pittman's out and Flacco's under center and Downs is the wide receiver 1, I mean, there's some really interesting things to pay attention to there. A.D. Mitchell would be stepping in as the number 3 receiver, playing a lot of snaps. People would be probably overlooking him. So lots of moving parts in that game.
Before we move to quarterback here, want to mention we do got our 30% off with promo code Pete over at 1 Week Season. I got the matchups up here. There's the full NFL Edge there where you can go get all of the game breakdowns as well as JM's DFS interpretations. And then my favorite, the scroll there that populates later tonight and over the weekend with all of the good stuff, including JM's entire player pool. I know a lot of you guys have taken the plunge and really enjoy all of the content and OWS getting you guys ready for the slate. So make sure you guys check that out. Take advantage of the 30% off with promo code PETE30. That's PETE30 for 30% off. Let's head over to quarterback. JM, we got our cover boy, Dak Prescott. We got some of these rushing guys at the top, like you mentioned, Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels. Where does this week start for the quarterback position?
I think that the way I'm looking at this week is you're either playing Lamar or Dak, or you're fading Lamar or Dak. And what I mean by that is you're not just, oh no, I'm playing this quarterback instead. If you are playing somebody else on this slate, you are, whether you're meaning to or not, you're making a decision that you're fading these 2 guys. So starting with Lamar, if you're not playing Lamar, you're either saying that the Ravens score a lot of points through other players, namely probably Derrick Henry, or that the Ravens just underwhelm against Washington, which is pretty unlikely, right? So playing Derrick Henry on a lot of non-Lamar rosters is a sharp way to go. Obviously, there's another scenario in which Lamar puts up 29 DraftKings points, and like you get a cheaper guy who puts up 26 or 29 or 30 plus, right? So, but you still have to think about like Lamar is going to put up a good score, or somebody else from the Ravens probably will. And then that Cowboys one, there are scenarios in which the Cowboys decide, hey, let's try to win with Rico Dowdle. There are scenarios in which the Lions defense plays well, or in which the Cowboys haven't looked like an elite team this year, and the Lions mostly have. The Lions could dominate that game. But we also know that Dak and CeeDee Lamb at home last year were consistently putting up 65 combined points, 75 combined points, 80 combined points. And so he's another player who, look at these passing attempt numbers, right? 42 pass attempts, 51 pass attempts, 39 pass attempts, the passing yardage, 293, 379, 352. Like, they're going to be willing to let him drop back and pass if the game kind of develops that way. And this is the type of matchup where most teams do that. So there's a very clear scenario here where Dak, he's kind of the only pocket passer who you can consistently see him putting up 30 plus DraftKings points, and he's priced in this 6,700 range. So I think those are the two guys that I'm accounting for. And if I'm not playing them, I want to be thinking about, do I want to play Derrick Henry on this roster? Like, I think for me, maybe every Spencer Rattler roster of mine will have Derrick Henry on it. So if I'm not playing these guys, I want to account for that in some other way. And the math there, I'll talk about it a little bit more in the Angles podcast, but it's like, if Rattler scores 16 DraftKings points, that's great. But if Lamar scores, or let's take Dak, if Dak scores 35 and CeeDee Lamb scores 40, well, like, you're not getting those points. And so you need your Rattler plus high-priced guy to kind of make up a lot of those points that you're missing out on, right? Because you can get a 4K guy this week who's going to add 10 points to Dak plus CeeDee Lamb. And because you can only play one quarterback, you're missing out on that 35-point score. So you kind of need like Rattler to either separate from the other cheap guys, or you need none of these high-priced quarterbacks to put up like a 35-point type of score. So just a lot of thought that goes into what am I doing on rosters that don't have Dak and Lamar Jackson, and probably a lot of rosters that do have Dak and Lamar Jackson this week.
I do want to dig in a little bit more to Rattler because it's a unique thing that we don't often get on a slate. But as far as the Dak and Lamar stuff, are those two spots where, because a lot of times we kind of have the conversation of you just want to play that offense, you think they can succeed as is, versus what are the elements we need for like a full-blown shootout, similar to what we got in that Ravens and Bengals game. For the Lamar and Dak plays, are you interested in playing those more as like, this game goes nuts, both teams get pushed, I want to bring back? Or are you thinking there's elements where it's like, I could just play my Dak stuff and I don't even need to worry about the Lions pieces?
On the Ravens and Commanders one, I'm fine not having Commanders pieces on those Lamar rosters. On the Cowboys ones, I'll have Lions pieces on all of them. I mean, the Lions last year, I think it's easy to forget. Like last year, Amon-Ra, we'll pick 25.9 points as a cutoff because it's kind of like getting up into that 30-point range, but it's kind of meaning that extra bonus or that extra touchdown kind of separates from those 22-pointers. We usually see that jump from like the 2021s, 22s up to those 25.9 and above. Amon-Ra St. Brown hit that mark 6 times last year. Jahmyr Gibbs hit it 4 times last year. Sam Laporta hit it 2 times last year. Jameson Williams has hit it once already this year. And so this is a team. This is a team that's going to produce these high-end tournament scores more often than most other teams. The complication is that these are kind of higher priced guys and you have to pick which guy it's going to be. But if I'm playing a game environment in which Dak and CeeDee Lamb are combining, I'm putting them on a roster together and saying, hey, maybe they get 75 plus DraftKings points. Well, in that scenario, I probably want to account for one of these Lions pieces also hitting, recognizing that somebody I'm competing against with a Dak and CeeDee Lamb roster will also have that correct Lions piece. So I want to try to get that correct Lions piece myself. Yeah.
And I think it sets up well because like you said, they are expensive. If you're just running optimizers, you're not going to get a ton of Detroit stuff. But it is going to allow you to be unique, I think, kind of picking your spots for these guys, specifically like I think Laporta, Gibbs, these guys who can go nuts, but their price just feels just slightly expensive to people. So I like that angle. Let's talk about Spencer Rattler. So the whole reason we're getting this salary dynamic is because the pricing came out before the Derek Carr injury. And then we get Spencer Rattler priced as a backup quarterback. And so what, JM, if we knew this news ahead of time or the algorithm did, he would be a 5K quarterback. So we're essentially getting like a 1K discount here.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a 4,800 quarterback and probably a 4,800 quarterback that people wouldn't be super excited to play. I mean, we're talking about
Yeah.
a fifth round rookie who's, got a above average arm, but not an elite arm, who has mobility, but is not really a scrambler. Playing a good defense with a blitz happy defensive coordinator who Spencer Rattler had 1 year in college where he was really good against the blitz, other years where he struggled against the blitz. Todd Bowles has a long history of being really good against backup or against rookie quarterbacks. So yeah, I mean, not a spot that I'll say it like this. I'm mostly going to be playing Spencer Rattler to account for the fact that so many other people are going to be playing Spencer Rattler. And the question then becomes, is this the hill I want to die on? Do I want to take a stance and say, I'm completely fading him? Or do I want to say, let's say ownership can change as we get deeper into the week, more value becomes available. But early ownership projections was like 18 to 20% Spencer Rattler. So do I want to make sure I have 8 to 10% Spencer Rattler? Do I want to make sure I have him on one or two of my 13 single entry 3-max rosters? And that's probably what I'll end up doing, because to me, you kind of tally up the numbers. What are the chances of him throwing for 300 plus yards? Pretty low. What we probably see is like 200, 225 passing yards. We might see, 1 or 2 points on the ground, but we'll also probably see an interception or two. And so that's like 8, 9 points. And then it's like, how many points does he get from touchdowns? We really think he's throwing 3 touchdown passes in this spot. That's pretty unlikely. And so to me, I see Spencer Rattler as a guy who probably puts up like 13, 14, 16 points, somewhere in that range. But then, you flip that around. Well, how many other 4K guys are going to put up 16 DraftKings points? So then there's that last step of, okay, but if you play Rattler, you're eliminating your opportunity to play other quarterbacks. Therefore, Rattler getting 16 points, that's great point per dollar, but you can get 10 points from another cheap guy. And so if you miss out on a 35-point score quarterback, then, you're actually pretty far behind the field, even though you got that nice point per dollar production. So it's a very unique, layered sort of thought process that goes into how you handle the Spencer Rattler situation. If we don't get any quarterback scoring north of 25 DraftKings points, he ends up being kind of a cheat code on this slate. But playing him, you're either saying he has an outlier type of game, a game that he wouldn't have often if we played at the slate 100 times, which that's not a great bet at high ownership, right? Lots of people want to play this guy and you're hoping for an outlier. Or you're saying no other quarterbacks top 25, 26 DraftKings points, which very easily could happen. And in that case, he becomes a really sharp way to build. So I'm kind of targeting the quarterbacks on this slate that I think can put up, 30, 35 plus. The quarterbacks that I think can put the slate out of reach. Or I'm, building around Rattler and ideally playing maybe some Rico Dowdle, playing some Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, playing some Lions defense, playing some Derrick Henry, playing scenarios where these other quarterbacks don't end up blowing up. And I also want to highlight, Andy Dalton's only 1,200 more than Spencer Rattler. Yeah. So I think that's another place where Dalton plus Chuba plus Deontay or Dalton plus Deontay is kind of an interesting pivot off of that as well, where you're not spending that much more money. If you're going to pair Rattler with somebody, you're kind of getting into that same price range overall of the combination of Dalton and Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, that's a good call out. And, looking at maybe some of the other cheap guys that the field might gravitate to, we should talk about Justin Fields, 5,800. We've seen the ceiling game a couple weeks ago, did just get, some news. Russell Wilson is going to be active, but he is likely going to serve as the number 2. So it does look like a Justin Fields spot here against the Raiders. Any interest in that?
No. Fields, mobile quarterback who's inexpensive, is not a guy I'm going to go out of my way to tell people not to play. But I'm always looking for game environments that could push Justin Fields. And I don't want to bet on this being one of those game environments. So if I miss out on a blow up field score, I'm okay with that.
You mentioned maybe not seeing quite the super high ceiling for that Packers and Cardinals game. If you did lean into that, would it be with Love or Kyler, or the quarterback stay away for you there?
Yeah, I'm going to have some Love and Kyler in large field play. And my plan is going to be in those scenarios. It's just the nature of how these two teams attack. Kyler's unlikely to top 26, 27, 28 DraftKings points. Jordan Love has topped 28 DraftKings points once in his career. And that was when he had to throw the ball 54 times, chasing points against Minnesota. He's topped 26 DraftKings points twice in his career. And so this is one of those spots where if Lamar Jackson puts up 35, if Dak puts up 32, 35, like these guys are falling behind because it's highly unlikely that one of them puts up 32-35. But same thing, what I said last week with Love and Purdy is like they have a pretty good shot at 22, 24, 26. And so if that's the score that you need, then these are really great options, right? So this is kind of one of those spots where we'll have a lot of rules in the Bink machine around playing Kyler and Love with pieces that account for how those other quarterbacks underwhelm. So whether that's Derrick Henry, whether that's the Lions defense, whether that's Rico Dowdle, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, sort of betting on those other game environments playing out differently. And these quarterbacks, as a result, being some of the guys that you really needed to have.
We've talked about Dak. Any interest in Goff, or if you're playing that game, is it going to be mainly through Dak?
Yeah, I'm going to have, I'll say it like this. If I have 30% Dak on my rosters this week, I might have 5% Goff. It's just like they're priced very similarly, and the Lions are much more capable of running the ball. They're far less likely to throw the ball 50 plus times, right? We see this 55 pass attempt game against Tampa Bay, and then we see the course correction down to 23 and 18, because that's really how they like to win games. Whereas the Cowboys, we can consistently see those 35, 40, 45, 50. So there's just more pathways to Goff underwhelming, and there's fewer, there's just more opportunities for touchdowns to not come through Goff than there are for touchdowns to not come through Dak in this spot. And so Dak is just a much higher confidence player with a much higher ceiling.
One other quarterback to ask you about, because you did mention some interest in that game environment. Kirk Cousins coming off his Thursday Night Football performance, throwing for 500 plus yards. Thoughts on this spot versus Carolina for him?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I might have a little bit of him in large field play. I don't, Kirk Cousins, he's looked like Kirk Cousins with like 80% of the arm that he had before. It's a great spot, but then you got to think, like, how much can the Panthers push them? And if the Panthers aren't pushing them, how many pass attempts is Kirk Cousins getting? And I'm always wary of these spots where you're coming off of, 58 pass attempts, and then everybody wants to chase. And it's like, that was a very unique game environment. The time to play him was in that game where he was throwing the ball 58 times, not the games where he's throwing it 35, 29, 29, 26. So I just have a hard time seeing this game developing in such a way that Cousins has to drop back 50 plus times, and people tend to chase those box scores without thinking about the context of them. So this is not, I guess, basically all of that to say, can Kirk Cousins go for 30 plus DraftKings points? He absolutely can. It's just not super likely. And I think that the field is going to want to chase that box score from last week.
Yeah, and I think specifically because it's not even that I feel like people are super excited about Kirk. It's just those wide receivers are looking like good values. Drake London, Mooney, Ray. And so I think naturally it's like, man, if these guys are good values, and I do think people will feel a little more comfortable playing Kirk than they would Dalton if they're wanting to play that game where it's like, I'll play Chuba or Deontay, and then I'll do an Atlanta stack with Kirk. So I could see him end up his ownership coming in higher than it's currently projected.
Yeah, it's funny too, because we've seen so many instances lately of one team getting down a lot of points early, having to pass a bunch. And that, we saw three of them across like 6 days of football, like a Thursday, Sunday, a Monday night game, a Thursday night game. So 5 days of football, like all these games where one team jumped out to a big lead. The quarterback in that game is throwing the ball 30 times, and the other quarterback is having to throw it 42 times, 54 times, 58 times with Geno Smith against Detroit. And then we saw it again with Kirk Cousins throwing the ball 58 times. So, that's not a scenario that's likely to play out in Kirk Cousins' favor. It's likelier that the Falcons jump out to a big lead, and then Dalton's having to throw the ball 42 times, something like that. So, I see the other side as being kind of really the spot where the passing volume is likely to line up, and therefore the passing upside is likely to line up.
Let's move over to running back, and we can kind of stay in this game because I think two of the most popular plays on the slate are going to be Bijan Robinson. Requires a little bit of a leap of faith considering his form lately and losing some touches to Tyler Algier, and then Chuba Hubbard, where he has just been playing awesome. Still no Jonathan Brooks in sight, really operating as the bell cow there. Thoughts on those guys or other, kind of extreme top plays for you at running back?
Yeah, we always like concentrated offenses and offenses that can do well. A quick note on the Panthers, they faced Dalton's 3 starts, right? They faced the Raiders, who ranked 29th in defensive DVOA, and they put up 36 points in that game. They faced the Bengals, who ranked 22nd in defensive DVOA and put up 24 points in that game. Then they faced the Bears, who ranked 7th in defensive DVOA and put up 10 points. Atlanta ranks 20th in defensive DVOA. They rank 31st in pressure rate. They rank, I think it's like 27th in opponent drive success rate. So this is a softer matchup, and this is a spot where we should be able to see the Panthers put up around 24 points and maybe more than that. And this whole offense is flowing through Chuba Hubbard and Deontay Johnson. So I think that pairing these two together is a really sharp way to go. We've seen, 2 of these 3 weeks, pairing them together would have gotten you on pace for a tournament win in terms of the salary spent and the score return. And so I think playing either one of these guys, playing them together, all sharp ways to go. Bijan Robinson is one of these where I opened the slate on Tuesday, and one of my first thoughts was like, oh man, I'm going to be all over this play. And I think that's kind of how a lot of people, most people who are playing DFS are busy. They've got jobs, lives. This is a hobby that they're doing. And I think that initial instinct is going to stick with a lot of people. I don't think that, let's say he's 30% owned, which I could see.
For sure.
I don't think that the play justifies 30% ownership when we look at these carries, right? 12 attempts, 7 attempts, 16 attempts, whatever it was in the other game, 14, right? Week 1, he had 18 and Tyler Algier had hardly any touches. Like the ADP around Bijan Robinson was built off of this thought of Arthur Smith is gone. He's going to get so many touches. And that hasn't been the case, right? He's getting about 18 touches a game. So love him as a player, love the matchup. It won't surprise me if he puts up 30 DraftKings points. I'm going to have Bijan Robinson. I'm going to have him on probably a couple of my tighter builds. I'm going to have him on my large field play, but I would have to imagine I'm going to be underweight the field just because the field is going to way overrate his chances of popping off for a big game. So the thing about the reason why I'll still have him is I want to account for the fact that he's a guy who, it's like Aaron Jones with the Packers. Like he could randomly see 26 touches out of nowhere, and we can't predict it coming. Also, he could score 2 or 3 touchdowns on only 18 touches. And so I want to account for the fact that he can put up a bury you for not playing him type of score, but he's also not a guy who's likeliest to do that. And so there's potential that it actually ends up being edge, like rosters that don't have him end up being edge when a lot of people are going to this play. So basically all that to say, I mean, I know that some people are new to this show and they're wanting picks and they're wanting us to say, this guy is a must play or this guy's a fade, right? Like there's nuance to this play. It's just not as likely to hit as people are going to give it credit for, but it still very much can hit. And I want to account for that. Yeah.
I like those notes there. Let's talk about some other kind of running back plays that are standing out to you. You can go in either direction. We got, the big dogs at the top, the guys who are shoving it down my throat in best ball, Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara. We got some other value plays we can hit on. What stands out to you at running back?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably skip Kamara just because I don't think that offense is going to function at as high of a level. And again, pricing wasn't adjusted for Spencer Rattler being in there. But Saquon is, he's one of these guys who I'd love to see more passing volume for Saquon. But, if I'm going to say that about him, why am I not saying that about Derrick Henry, right? So obviously like the spot more for Derrick Henry from a game environment and offensive perspective. But both those guys in the mix for me. Also, like there's more value in Derrick Henry because of the story that you're telling, right? You're taking away points from another guy people have to account for if he hits. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. There's other guys in here who you can kind of lean on. Josh Jacobs as being one of them. And then you got down at the lower ends, Tony Pollard really stands out on this slate. Yeah. Kind of disappointing to see initial ownership projections, see that people were on that play. We've got Rico Dowdle, who's kind of taken over this job. Not a great matchup, but is leverage off of the main way people are going to try to attack that side of the ball. Najee Harris, who has just looked completely awful, but another spot. Here's a crazy stat. Najee Harris, since his rookie year, he has topped, I think it's 20. I think he's topped 20 DraftKings points 4 times in like 41 games, something like that. 2 of them were the last 2 games last year. So it looked like, hey, maybe he's going to get this thing rolling. And then there's, maybe Rashad White doesn't play. So Bucky Irving would have an opportunity here to see a much larger share of the backfield work. Maybe Brian Robinson Jr. doesn't play, and another spot where Austin Eckler could end up hitting in a game where Washington might have to pass the ball a little bit more. And then, nothing else that I'm really seeing where it's like I want to go out of my way to play other guys.
Yeah, and so it does seem like maybe a little theme here this week is thinking of what story you're telling with the running backs and what leverage they might be providing on, say, other chalkier pieces. I don't think that that Packers passing game stack is going to get super popular, but I assume Josh Jacobs as a pivot off of that, like, hey, this game doesn't go nuts, but they have a ton of success running on a really bad run defense. Josh Jacobs could put up a 25-point score, that type of thought process.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically waiting for him to, score some touchdowns, and it could come in bunches, and that's kind of the bet that you're placing with. I mean, it's kind of really the similar bet to what you're placing with Bijan Robinson of like, the workload is not quite what we would want. Josh Jacobs less pass game work, so you kind of see these. If you just tally up how many points you're getting from Josh Jacobs through the air on a typical week, it's like it's 4. You got that 6-pointer, but it's 4, it's 3, it's 1, it's 0. Whereas Bijan Robinson, it's consistently like 4, 5, 6, 7. I think he has one game with 9 points through the air. But both these guys, you're really just saying, man, hopefully they get multiple touchdowns finally. And if they do, then, they're helping you. They're putting up 24, 25, 26 DraftKings points. And if they get the 100-yard bonus along with that, they're putting up 30-plus DraftKings points. So they both have that within their range.
One player I could see start to get pretty popular as the weekend progresses with Ramondre Stevenson looking unlikely would be Antonio Gibson. He's one of the kind of guys who stand out, sub 6K. He's priced at 5,300. Obviously, we get Drake May taking over. Any interest in that spot?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's kind of like this Spencer Rattler versus Andy Dalton thing, right? You're not saving that much in salary to get down to Antonio Gibson going against one of the best run defenses in football, one of the best defenses in football. Houston ranks 3rd in DVOA, like overall defensive DVOA on the season. They've taken on, maybe it's last year and this year, but like 3 rookie quarterbacks, and they've averaged 7 sacks a game in those spots. And so, bad offensive line, Drake May's first start. I mean, it could just be a bad game for New England. I also think that there's, just touching on New England real quickly, Jalen Polk, and, if he ends up getting more snaps, he played 16 snaps last week, his first game back, but Kendrick Bourne, both those guys, are the Patriots able to actually open things up and throw downfield a little bit? The Texans have had they've had like 400 yards against them left on the table of downfield passes that just missed, right? Like every single week they've had A.D. Mitchell in week 1, Matt Collins last week, guys in between where it's like guys were wide open. The quarterback just threw a bad pass. That could have been a bunch of yards. So there's an outside shot that the Patriots return some form of value here. I kind of like it a little bit more on the cheap wide receivers just because that's worth more. If you get like 16 points from one of those guys, then, if you get 16 points from Antonio Gibson, it's hard to see him scoring 2 or 3 touchdowns here.
I do want to just pass along one note on the Najee stuff, because he was a guy I was really looking at a little bit more so on Underdog this week. But Jaylen Warren got in a full practice today. I thought he was listed as doubtful. So that could be a huge fly in the ointment of the Najee stuff, just because a big boost to the Najee workload recently has been that receiving production. So just a note to watch the Jaylen Warren stuff there. Any other running backs that you kind of want to call out? Seems like you might have maybe a shorter list than normal at running back.
Yeah, I might. I'm pretty deep into the player grid, but I haven't like pulled my actual list together. So I focus on one game at a time and build out the player grid. So I'm not actually totally sure how big my running back list is, and I'll know by this afternoon. But yeah, I could see it being smaller, or at least there being more ownership on like a lot of ownership being dedicated to just a few guys, Chuba Hubbard, Derrick Henry, some of these other guys like that, and then some spillover from there.
Yeah, I guess one other, I think he's priced a little too high, but it does sound like we're going to get Joe Mixon back for the Texans. We haven't seen him in a few weeks. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess I would have a hard time seeing him getting like 25 touches in this spot, because if Houston controls this game and then he's coming back from injury and this is a team with Super Bowl aspirations, you would think that they would kind of slow play him in this spot. So, you see 33 touches in that first game in a really soft matchup, putting up 29.8 DraftKings points. Although New England has been poor against the run, poor against the pass so far this year. So yeah, Mixon's a guy I was thinking about earlier this week. Haven't really thought about him since because I didn't expect him to play. So I don't want to speak too much on him, but yeah, I don't think that the workload will be huge. We'd have to be pretty efficient in this spot.
Yeah, we're not going to dig into some of the other kind of situations that are a little fragile right now with injury, but I think that's a good kind of overview of the running back position. Want to shout out, we have a few new YouTube members here on the channel. Thank you, Cole, Bellhorn, and Ronnie. That gets you guys access, depending on what level you are, to the premium shows here on the channel. I do 2 a week. I do a Saturday night show called DFS After Dark. That's an interview series. I bring people on from around the industry, and we kind of just have fireside chats about DFS topics, more evergreen conversations, not slate specific. This week, I'm having a guy from the Deposit Kingdom Discord named Jay Fresh on. He recently solo shipped a showdown contest on DraftKings for $1 million. Super sharp player I've gotten to know in the Discord, plays all kinds of the different fantasy formats, and excited to pick his brain. He has a really dialed in showdown process. So if you guys are showdown players or just interested in what a Millie Maker winner looks like these days, you can check that out. And then on Sunday, I will have the cram. So that'll be the week 6 DFS cram. That's at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. We go through all the overnight news, latest ownership. We go through, again, kind of position by position, my favorite plays. And then we run the sims, look at some lineups, all that good stuff, drafts, pick'ems. It is a fun time. So become a YouTube member. You get those 2 extra shows a week at the Hand Builder and Opto Bros tier. All right, Jam, let's move over to wide receiver. Now, we do have some of these big dogs at the top. I assume you're going to have a decent amount of CeeDee Lamb interest there if you're going with Dak, Amon-Ra. What is the stuff on the high end of the wide receiver position that interests you?
Yeah, on the high end, and like I mentioned, AJ Brown is in the mix for me. Stephon Diggs, I don't have the stats right in front of me, but something like he's put up 28 plus points once in like his last 26 games, something like that. So even with Nico Collins out, I don't think I'm going to be going there. So really and then get down below that, and you got like Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be interesting. Jaden Reed's interesting. Chris Godwin, who, Mike Evans has like 9 straight games of 12, 13 or fewer points against New Orleans in that Marshawn Lattimore matchup. And Chris Godwin's hit in a few of those. So there's kind of below CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown, some guys to think about. But CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown are really the 2 guys up here who are drawing my attention. So CeeDee Lamb has not hit yet this year, but go back to last year, he hit 28 plus DraftKings points 8 times. He hit 32 plus DraftKings points 6 times. And Dak's score in those 6 games were 32.1, 31.4, 41.9, 28.3, 24.3 and 26.2. So it's like if CeeDee Lamb's hitting for one of these monster games, CeeDee Lamb plus Dak actually ends up paying off every single time. And so for me, it's going to be a lot of CeeDee Lamb and probably Dak on like 75% of those CeeDee Lamb rosters. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, like pricing starts to get tight around that. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, all those guys are going to be mixed into my Dak rosters, kind of mixing and matching them in different ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see here. You mentioned AJ Brown. You mentioned Godwin. What about, for value? We were talking about that Carolina and Atlanta game, and it does seem like people are going to gravitate to Drake London, to Darnell Mooney, to Ray McLeod, obviously Deontay Johnson as well. How do you think about that? It just the plays in a vacuum, and then also wondering, if those guys are popular, do they become less attractive to you?
Yeah. So actually, let me. This is going to foreshadow our building block a little bit early.
Okay.
But every time last year that Dak and CeeDee Lamb hit 6 games, right? In all 6 of those games, either Brandon Cooks or Jake Ferguson could have been added to that stack and kept you on a 4x pace for what Jalen Tolbert and Jake Ferguson cost this week, $5K, right? So every one of those weeks, they were scoring like 16 points or 19 points or 22 points, or there's a week where Brandon Cooks scored 35 points. And what we see is, how is Dak getting those big scores? It's because he's throwing the ball 40 times, 42 times, 50 times. So when a quarterback is throwing the ball a ton, yes, their alpha is going to produce at a higher level, but so is somebody else in a lot of these scenarios, which is why these doubles and even triple stacks become so valuable. And so we see, a couple weeks ago, when Geno Smith throws the ball 58 times, when Jordan Love throws the ball 54 times, when CJ Stroud throws the ball 42 times, when Kirk Cousins throws the ball 58 times, like then we end up seeing not just Drake London hits because Kirk Cousins threw it 58 times, but also Darnell Mooney hits for his biggest game of the year. And Ray McLeod, I don't actually think he had his biggest game, but he had like opportunities to have his biggest game of the year. And so Kyle Pitts had his biggest game of the year. So like you see how the volume elevating for the quarterback elevates everything. If Kirk Cousins throws the ball 34 times, 30 times, whatever, like you're that much likelier of, so McLeod did have his best game, and so did Mooney, so did London, so did Pitts, all in the same spot, right? Now you're kind of just hoping to get the touchdown or get a broken play. Like Darnell Mooney's not going to get a 100-yard bonus if Kirk Cousins is throwing the ball 34 times, unless there's a broken play. So you're kind of just saying, hopefully I get lucky on the touchdown. That said, just purely in terms of role, Ray McLeod is underpriced. Darnell Mooney is underpriced. Drake London, to me, I only want to play him if I'm betting on the game environment. But the other two guys, like, they're underpriced enough that they're still in my player pool regardless of the quarterback situation. But I just think there's like a note of caution on it in that they're underpriced. Also, their chances of going for 4x or 5x their salary are not super high. You're just kind of hoping that you guess right on who scores the touchdown on their offense.
I want to ask you about the two guys tethered to those quarterbacks in the Ravens and Commanders game, Terry McLaurin and Zay Flowers, if they would be exclusively used in perhaps stacking with those guys, or if you like either of them as one-off plays as a way to get like access to that game. If, say, you are playing Dak stuff, how do you view those two plays?
Yeah, I don't think you have to have a quarterback from that game. If they're so much of Lamar and Jaden Daniels' value comes from their legs. So if you're actually getting a 30-point score from Zay Flowers, or which we still haven't seen yet, but like we've also seen, it's like when we hadn't seen it yet from Rashee Rice, and it's like, oh, well, if he gets the touchdown here, right, then that's a 29-pointer. Or if he gets the 100-yard bonus on this one where he had 11 for 90 and a touchdown, like, then that ends up being a high-end score. So, there's like Zay Flowers is knocking on the door of a high-end score. If he gets it, like, it could just be taking away some points from Lamar because he's running a little bit less. If Flowers has a 2-touchdown game, then that's probably lowering the overall ceiling on Lamar Jackson. Same thing with McLaurin. So I like playing those guys with the quarterbacks, but I'm also fine playing them without the quarterbacks.
That makes sense. I'm trying to think here on the kind of the value side of things again. Man, I am not seeing a ton under 4K here, maybe like an 80 Mitchell on the Colts. Maybe if Richardson goes, anything down there for the value hunters this week?
Yeah, I mean, Houston is going to be without Nico Collins. It looks like they're going to be without Robert Woods as well. So Robert Woods doesn't get plays designed for him, doesn't catch passes, but he's one of the leaders inside their building, one of their veteran leaders. So he has a role ahead of Xavier Hutchinson. But Xavier Hutchinson could be the number 3 wide receiver. That's not a schemed role, but that's opportunities on the field. Jalen Brooks with the Cowboys, Kevontae Turpin on the Cowboys, not schemed roles, but they're on the field. I mentioned the Patriots pass catchers. If Drake May is able to, obviously he's going to need time, which the Patriots offensive line hasn't been providing, but he's more likely to be able to throw the ball downfield. And so we could see, 1 or 2 big plays from a Patriots pass catcher, Jalen Polk and Kendrick Bourne. If probably the most interesting one is if Pittman misses, then they've got to put A.D. Mitchell on the field. And A.D. Mitchell looked awesome when he was on the field. The problem was a lot of people were hypothesizing that he was just running the wrong routes. There was a misfire in week 1 where A.D. Mitchell was wide open and Anthony Richardson misfired to him in the end zone. But it actually looked like Anthony Richardson was caught by surprise by what A.D. Mitchell had done. And so it was like, oh my gosh, he's wide open. I got to throw it right now. Like, he wasn't expecting him to be doing that on that particular play. And so, and that was kind of part of his college profile, was like, he's just going to go out there and run around and get open. At the same time, he's going to go out there and run around and get open. And if he's on the field, there's opportunities for him to have a big game. So depending on how injuries shake out there, I think he's really interesting. And then on Las Vegas without Devontae Adams, so not under 4K, but Trey Tucker still kind of part of this. And Ray McLeod right there at 4,300, kind of a part of this, of like just guys who are underpriced. Michael Wilson still a little bit underpriced for his role at 4,600. So there's not like sub 4K value that really stands out, but there is value on this slate where you can feel, you can get some of these expensive guys and then kind of be like, oh, well, here's Darnell Mooney at 5,300, or here's Trey Tucker at 4,200. Here's Ray McLeod at 4,300. Like, there's different pieces you can pull in, certainly from a lower end perspective.
Yeah, I just pulled up here the Fantasy Life Utilization Report, which is a great kind of screener for looking at the usage. But it's so funny looking at the Alec Pierce compared to A.D. Mitchell stuff. And obviously, Alec Pierce has been the one who's had some big games. But, he has almost triple the amount of routes each week than A.D. Mitchell. But then the targets per route run, it's Alec Pierce is down here at 8%. A.D. Mitchell, 50% targets per route run week 3, 33%, 58% targets per route run. So when he is on the field, he is getting the ball. So that is a really interesting angle. If he sees a bump in routes, that could lead to a pretty big game there. Trying to think of some other wide receivers I want to mention. I feel like I know your answer because this is going to be a game environment you're going to have zero interest in. But like Ladd McConkey, because you have shown some interest in him, Cortland Sutton, those guys are kind of cheap, projecting for a decent amount of targets. Thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, man. When you make a mistake, you got to be able to admit the mistake. I thought that the Chargers would throw the ball more than they have, and obviously, like, the expectation from the field in the offseason was not that, but it seems like, most of the time the truth is somewhere in the middle, not on the extremes, but this has been a situation of the extremes, and two of the best defenses in the NFL. So I don't expect this to be a game that plays to the upside. Yeah, I really like Ladd McConkey, and you look at the 14-pointer, the 17.7 pointer. So yeah, not something I'm going to argue against. It's just hard for me to see him putting up like a 30-pointer, and I'm like, oh God, why didn't I play him at 4,900? So not really on my radar this week.
Yeah. You mentioned the kind of the stacking, the triple stacking. I'm curious, just because it does sound like you have a ton of interest in this Dallas Detroit game. Like, say in maybe smaller contests, the SPY sub 5,000 entries, like how many players could you envision having from that same game in a lineup? Like how much would you push it?
You could put 4 Cowboys on. It was, I got the notes right here, but I think it was 3 times last year that you could have played 4 Cowboys and stayed on there was, so let's just put Jalen Tolbert in place of Brandon Cooks for simplicity. So Tolbert, Ferguson, CeeDee Lamb, and Dak, they cost 25.3K. So you need about 100 points to stay on a 200-point pace. They had games last year of 100.1, 105.0, and 132.3.
Wow.
To go along with games of 90.8 and 92.8. So especially smaller field stuff, you can get away with playing, and the other one was 87.3. Basically, like every time that you could have played the Dak double stack, you could have also just played the Dak triple stack in smaller field. It would have kept you on like 175 to 225 point pace, 230 point pace.
Yeah, that definitely seems viable to me, especially with just how condensed things are right now. And I assume when you say kind of the 4 Cowboys too, that would include tossing in Rico Dowdle to the stack.
No, just the pass catchers. That
was just the pass catcher. Okay.
Yeah, that's just Tolbert, Ferguson, because when they throw, they just throw so much, right? And they're like, we can't run the ball, we can't score on the ground. And most teams do that against Detroit already. They face, I think, 3rd or 4th highest opponent pass play rate. It was the same thing last year. Team just a lot of times you're like, whatever, we can't run against the Lions. Let's just throw the ball. And so, it's one of those spots where, and to me, to be clear, like this building block is going to be named pick a lane, because as I said at the top, there's so many ways this game could play out, including it being like pretty low scoring. And so this is kind of just like about picking a lane and then building around that lane. So the way that my roster is going to look this week, like I'll have Lions pieces away from this game. I'll have Ravens pieces away from that game. I don't expect to have any Cowboys pieces, except for maybe Dowdle, away from rosters built around this game. So it's like, I'm going to have a lot of rosters built around this game and picking that lane of, if this game shoots out, it can shoot out in such a way that it's the game you had to have. And so I want to overstack and get all the points I can get, but I'm also going to have like another 60, 70% of my rosters. It's like, no, maybe some CeeDee Lamb, but no Tolbert, no Ferguson, no Dak, right? And so kind of isolate those in one spot. And if it hits, those rosters are winning tournaments or position to win tournaments. If that game misses, I still have a bunch of rosters that are building for different scenarios on the slate.
And that's like I think a good note on just the macro concept of correlation. It was something I was talking about a lot this offseason as it pertained to best ball. And it's like, it's the fringe guys, right? It's the Jalen Tolberts of the world that need the nutty game environment, all of the pass volume to put up a huge score. CeeDee Lamb, these alphas, the engines of the offense, they can have good games in bonanza, environments. And so I think that's like, when you are going in on a game, once you start, going down that path, then you want to be more open to those ancillary pieces because they need that game environment to succeed as opposed to just a one-off Jalen Tolbert hitting.
Right. Absolutely.
Let's see. There was, one more spot I wanted to ask you at wide receiver because there's a lot of moving parts with the Packers. Romeo Doubs coming back from his 1-game suspension. I believe there's a chance that Christian Watson could be back in this game. We, of course, have Jaden Reed. Wicks has been earning a lot of targets when he's on the field. So how are you thinking about these Packers pass catchers?
So the Packers, it's now 13 out of 14 games with Love that they have produced at least one pass catcher going for, I think it's 17.9 or more DraftKings points. So 13 out of 14, you're getting like a really solid score. Like Jaden Reed's the only expensive guy on this offense. Now, a lot of those scores have been from him, but when he's not getting 17, 18, 20, he's potentially putting up 26, 30, 36. So, even if you get like a 17-pointer from Reed, you're giving yourself upside for a tournament winning type of score. And if it's not coming from Reed, one of Dobbs or Watson or Tucker Kraft is probably going to put up 17.9 or more DraftKings points, because that's happened 13 of the last 14 games with Love. At the same time, like, you're guessing across a lot of guys. And so for me, it's not a spot where it stands out as like, oh, I have to mix and match all these pieces because somebody's going to hit. For when I'm looking at a spot where it's like, I'm going to mix and match different guys, it's because I'm expecting that at least one person on this team is going to hit a tournament winner. And so with the Packers, it's like, if you are going after Packers pieces, you're playing sharp. But also, if you're not attacking Packers pieces, there's a pretty good chance that they don't bury you for avoiding them or like not going out of your way to play them. So kind of a way of saying, like, I like the Packers pieces. I like any rosters that have Packers pieces on them, but it's probably not going to be a core focus for me this week because there's just same as last week, right? Last week I don't even know what chunk of my rosters, 60% of my rosters had Joe Flacco, Joe Burrow, or Lamar Jackson, right? And you're basically just saying, I think these two games have the potential to outperform everything else. And if that happens, you got to have the quarterbacks from these games. And so there are a couple games this week that I see similarly. If neither of those games perform at that level, then there's going to be lots of other pathways to first place. And so it's not about me predicting that these two games are going to shoot out. It's just about me positioning myself for what happens if those games shoot out. And then I'll have some other rosters, right? Like a small chunk of rosters that's Love and Kyler, small chunk of rosters that's Dalton, other things. But I just kind of want to bet on, like, if those two games don't shoot out, a big chunk of my roster is going to be dead. And then I'll have like another, 20%, 30% of my rosters that bet on different scenarios for the weekend. But kind of my core bet will be, hey, hopefully one of these games shoots out. If it doesn't, then, hopefully something else works out. But that's really where my focus is.
Yeah. And that makes sense too. Like, if you don't think the game has the potential to be the game you need, then you're less likely to want to guess on it. Whereas, hey, I'm willing to throw darts at Dallas pass catchers down there because I think the reward could be pretty big. Before we move to tight end, just want to mention immediately following the show at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, I do off and on the clock with the Badge Bros. Very similar structure to this show as far as, slate overview, going through the positions, but it's all focused on underdog and the drafting. I think myself and the crew, John and Nez, have been very dialed in lately. So if you guys are wanting to get a really good feel for the underdog slate, drafting tips, we'll also build some pick'ems, let you guys know those plays you can be scrolling down for there to get unique rosters in those big contests. That kicks off at 2:30 p.m. Eastern. I got the redirect set up. So if you just stay on this page, it should refresh and you can watch that right at 2:30. Jam, let's move to, when I set up the building blocks, I say everybody's favorite portion of the show, everybody's least favorite portion of the show, the tight end position. We're going to talk with here. I mean, looking at early kind of ownership, it seems like Jake Ferguson is going to be very popular. And then after that, kind of wide open. Anything of note at the tight end position for you this week?
Yeah, I mean, Ferguson's hits last year came outside of the playoffs where he put up three touchdowns, 37.3 points in that game. But his kind of solid scores last year came with Dak and CeeDee Lamb hitting. So I'll have plenty of Ferguson, but I'll be playing him differently than the field because my Ferguson will be in game stacks. I think Laporta is going overlooked. Laporta dramatically outperformed Jake Ferguson last year on like a ceiling basis and a week-to-week basis. And he's only 500 more. And I think because he hasn't hit yet this year, people are forgetting about him. So he's interesting. Trey McBride, really interesting. Don't love the matchup for Brock Bowers, but that has proved so far this season. It's like he can hit without the matchup cooperating. So I think any of those guys are interesting. I'm going to keep pounding the drum on these Ravens tight ends because there are going to be games where they hit. Last week I had a bunch of Isaiah Likely. He hit, 16.3 DraftKings points. Obviously, Tucker Kraft ends up putting up 24.2, and so that didn't create edge. But we see these guys are going to have games, and even Mark Andrews last week had 9.9 or something like that. So I'm going to keep hitting on these guys. Kyle Pitts is in the mix. Dalton Schultz, I think, is really interesting because last year he had, I think it was 13 games of 9 or more DraftKings points when they just had 2 wide receivers to focus on. And this week they have just 2 wide receivers to focus on. So I would expect him to perform at a level higher than what he's shown so far. And yeah, I mean, I think that's about it. There's really I think that this week we're definitely going to see some like 15 to 20 point scores at tight end. And there's a chance we see some 22, 24, 25 pointers. So I don't necessarily want to trap myself into a cheap guy who might get me 6 or 7. And I don't see any cheap guys who have a good shot at getting 20 points. So I'm going to kind of be looking at these, as much as we don't like to pay up a tight end, I'm going to be probably looking at Dalton Schultz and above, or I should say Mark Andrews and above for my tight end exposure.
Yeah. And of course we have just the undercurrent this year of everyone feeling very burned by tight ends, people coming around on it a little more. Like you said, Brock Bowers has a big game last week. We just watched George Kittle, who continues to dominate last night. So yeah, it does feel like the McBride or Laporta explosion specifically are going to be coming here soon. And I would definitely like to be on it when that happens. All right, now it is, unless are there any other tight end plays? I guess I'll throw out 2 at you that seem like they're going to be a little popular, even though you just said you don't have much interest in punting it off. Zach Ertz in that game environment, and then Cade Otton are 2 I'm seeing getting a little bit of love right now.
Okay. I mean, Zach Ertz has a real role. He just has no upside. So you're hoping he scores a touchdown to go with his yards and catches. Cade Otton, 6 and 7 catches in these 2 games, 8 and 9 targets. I guess, I mean, I'm not going to argue against them. They're cheap tight ends, right? Neither guy's likely to score 20 plus. And I just think that somebody will on this slate. So I want to try to hunt that for tournament wins.
Yeah. And I mean, that's pretty much true of most of these, right? Like they are touchdown or bust as far as them really, making things matter in your lineup outside of what, the Tucker Kraft, the McBride, the Bowers who could actually earn, 10 plus targets, basically.
Right. Who are like a schemed part of the offense and are consistently going to see looks. Those guys are kind of the ones likely to hit that high end score.
All right. I'll put you out of your misery, JM. No more tight end talk. It is time to build a lineup. All right. I got good news here for people who have waited to get in the Deposit Kingdom contest. This is the first Friday we have done where there still are some spots remaining. I asked DraftKings to make it bigger this week. We got it up to 1,200, which means we got a pretty juicy $2K first place prize, $1K to second up here. So there is a little less than 150 spots remaining. The only spot to get access to this contest is in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. The link is in the announcement section. I got the link to the Discord down below. You go in there, go to the announcements, then you can register up to a 3 max entry here, and I'll review the winning lineups. And I'll review your mom's winning lineup as well on the Portfolio Review Show every Monday morning at 10 a.m. on this channel. JM, I didn't ask you ahead of time who your building blocks were, but listening to the breadcrumbs throughout the show, I feel like I have an idea here. What are we starting with?
Yeah, we've got our pick a lane block, and we're going to see what we can do with salary from here. But it's going to be Dak Prescott. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb. And I'm going to say let's throw in Jalen Tolbert on this one, but you could do Tolbert or Ferguson. I want to have some flexibility at that tight end spot. And if we need to switch it around, then we can switch it over to Ferguson off of Tolbert.
Awesome. Yeah. So we got the Dak, CeeDee, Tolbert. You did mention that there would be maybe some instances where you would use a Lamb without Dak. I'm guessing there's basically no instances you would use Dak without CeeDee though.
No, I mean, Dak had a 1 game last year where he put up a high-end score and CeeDee Lamb wasn't there with him on it. So it can happen, but that's not a scenario that I want to necessarily bet on. Maybe a very small percentage. I might have a rule and I kind of put my initial rules in on Thursday and Friday in the Bink machine and then massage them on Saturday night. But I think I might have an initial rule that's like 95% of Dak rosters have to have CeeDee Lamb. So it leaves a little bit of wiggle room, but not something I'm going out of my way to do.
Yep. So this gives us obviously a little bit more expensive because the CeeDee Lamb, the stay or choose your lane. Is that more a nod to how you're playing the Detroit element of it?
No, I mean, it's just this idea that, in my write-up for this game, it was like, there's a lot of ways that this game could play out. And so the sharpest thing to do is kind of pick a lane for an individual roster and really, embrace that lane. So one of the lanes might be, this game is underwhelming. That's a lane that you're not playing anybody from this game, or only the Lions produce points, but it's Amon-Ra St. Brown and he's expensive and he puts up 25 or something like that. Like, there's ways where you don't need pieces from this game, but there's also ways where you would absolutely need pieces from this game and you want to fully embrace those rosters if you're going that direction. Definitely want to bring back on this roster. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown is, if this game is taking off, he's the likeliest guy to hit, but we might not be able to make the salary work on this roster. So what I'm going to do on this one, I wanted to leave tight end open to go with Sam Laporta and see if we can kind of go that direction. And a guy who, already if this hits, right? If CeeDee Lamb hits, let's put it like that. If CeeDee Lamb hits for a tournament winner, like last year's history shows us that this roster is getting 3 spots right. And most people will just be getting that CeeDee Lamb part right? So we are now competing against a much smaller percentage of the field if this hits. But we still want to think about, like, what is one other little thing we can do to differentiate from that portion of the field. And I think Sam Laporta is a way to do that on this roster. We can also throw in the Buccaneers on defense to get a sense of salary. So again, blitz happy Bucs defense that usually does well against rookie quarterbacks, and facing a 5th round rookie in this spot gets us leverage off of Spencer Rattler rosters as well. And as we're going to see, like, this gives us pretty nice salary, but we still have to worry about the running back position, where you're not going to find most guys, sub 5,400. So we're going to need to find at least one salary saver. But if we can find somebody we like, or somebody with ceiling, then that's going to give us opportunity to find, three more solid pieces on this roster. So what I'd like to do is go with the Chuba, Hubbard, and Deontay Johnson block and see if we're able to make it work in this one.
Yeah, so Chuba Hubbard, 6,300, Deontay Johnson, 6,100. Those guys definitely feel underpriced for their role. That would give us 4,600 remaining for running back flex. So we're gonna have to find a punt play, and then we could probably get up to like a 56 to 6,200 running back.
Yeah. So with the punt play, what we're ideally, if you get 3 or 4 points from your punt play, that's okay, as long as he has upside for a much bigger score than that. So, one thing that we do still have flexibility on is moving off of Laporta, because that's a place where you can kind of save some more salary. But some guys who are just pure punts, let's go ahead and throw in Jalen Polk. Let's throw in Jalen Polk and just see what this does for our salary.
Yeah, so that gets you right up to 5,600.
So it still doesn't quite get us what we would want at the running back position, because we're going to have to make a second sacrifice at the running back position, right? We're not going to have a guy that we're super confident in unless Rachaad White's out and we get Bucky Irving. This would compel me to move around some pieces. Cavante, that's one that I really like too, and that's a sharper way to build this roster too, is to throw in Cavante Turpin on this build as opposed to Jalen Polk, because it ties into what we're doing here. And we're basically saying that Dak throws the ball 45 to 50 times. So, but yeah, let's go ahead and take out Deontay Johnson. And that's not part of our central thesis here. And so we're able to take out Deontay Johnson. And then we're able to go with, we can go with a Ray McLeod, right? Where it's like, hey, we're riding along with the field, which is not a bad thing to do in this spot, because we have so much differentiation from having the full 3-player Dak stack and having Sam Laporta as the bringback, that if this hits for 90 points, we're competing against, 2%, 3% of the tournament field. And then if Laporta hits, we're separating from that. So at this point, just kind of riding with chalk is actually a sharper way to go. And this allows us to kind of pick our running back and then see what we have left at that final spot. So we can even do a crowd pleaser and go with Bijan Robinson, which, that's kind of the spot where I want to play him, is a spot where I really like the differentiation on the rest of the roster. Or we can go with a Tony Pollard, another player who I like. And so, if we go Bijan Robinson, we have enough money for Trey Tucker, which is like, okay, it's a dart, right? But it's not like one of these 3,800 darts where you're really hoping for a lot to go right. We're talking about a guy who, number 2 wide receiver on this offense, real role, has a 15-pointer and a 20-pointer over the last few weeks. And so, just gives us a nice roster and a lot of good theory on this roster, in that, like I said, if we're right on our Dak, Tolbert, Lamb build, we're separating from a huge chunk of the field. And then Laporta is our differentiation from that, 2% of the field, 3% of the field that has this full stack. And then Laporta differentiates us from that group. It's okay to just ride with chalk from there. And actually, this is the spot where I want to play somebody like Bijan Robinson, who I'm not as high on, but I know that the field is high on him. I know he could burn me. And so strategically, you want to say, okay, I'm already separating another spot. So the sharpest thing to do here is ride with the field. It's like when you make those late swap decisions. It's like, well, I'm way ahead. So if I have a 2v2 here, I want to play the chalkier side of this 2v2 because I'm ahead of the field here. I want to ride with the chalk as opposed to trying to differentiate further. And that's kind of what Bijan Robinson functions as on this roster.
Yeah, two kind of notes about this lineup. It is, I just noticed as well as the chat here, that it's almost exclusively afternoon only game because that Dallas-Detroit game, the Atlanta-Carolina, and that Trey Tucker play. So it would just be Buccaneers, the only information you'd be getting early. Does that ever factor into your decision of like, hey, maybe it would be nice to know if I can eat this chalk, if I get some information in my lineup early, or in the spot like this, just completely okay riding into the 4 p.m. games with only one slot filled?
Yeah, I mean, I never think or never overthink it on things like that. To me, if it's 8 guys going in the late window, I'm totally fine with that.
The other thing I want to mention, it's like, we talked a little bit about the chalk with the Carolina Atlanta stuff. At least the early stuff I'm looking at, this game outside of Ferguson, maybe Amon-Ra, is not going to be heavily owned. Like the individual pieces are not projecting for a ton. And I think that's because it is a little uncomfortable to really build into this game with how expensive like a Laporta bring back is, or how, we felt squeezed there, right? Having to do both Ray and Trey Tucker. Maybe a lot of people aren't going to love how that feels. So the fact that you can get access to the game of the week and it's not going to be the game of the week by DFS ownership is a pretty fun angle.
Yeah, that was the same thing we saw last week with Cincinnati and Baltimore, right? Where you didn't see a lot of Henry ownership. You didn't see a lot of Jamar Chase ownership. I had 35% Jamar Chase, and he was like 8 to 10% owned in most of the tournaments I was in. And so when you can get that separation from the field just because of how uncomfortable the pricing is. And I also like that we're kind of able to bet on another game environment that we like with Chuba and Bijan Robinson and Ray McLeod. And, yes, we have 2 pieces from Atlanta, but they're not necessarily cannibalizing each other if Atlanta's able to score 30 points here, because, Ray McLeod is cheap enough that he could put up 16 points. Bijan Robinson could put up 30 points together, and you end up just with a really nice combined score there.
Got to give a shout out to Achievers in the chat. I believe Achievers, if I'm connecting your usernames correctly, that your wife just gave birth to a baby about 6 or 7 hours ago. So congratulations, immediately back in the DFS streets, grinding out this stuff after becoming a dad, maybe twice over. I forget if you already had a kid, but congratulations, Achievers there. And we have over 600 people watching live. Appreciate all you guys. While you're here, if you'll hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. JM and I are here every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, breaking down the slate, getting you ready. And JM, let the people know again what's going on at 1 Week Season this week, stuff that they can get with their membership if they want to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, the scroll, which you're looking at if you're on YouTube right now, you click on any of those on the side and it just jumps you right down to the article. So all of your late week content is all in one spot. You got player pools, strategy, content, mixes of both, all in this one spot. And that's really the place to hang out on Friday and Saturday. If you are not a paid member on OWS, you still have access to all of the game breakdowns in the NFL Edge. So poke around the site, see if it's for you. As we always say, the site's not for everybody because we take a different approach to DFS than other sites. And so you tend to kind of know pretty quickly if it's for you or not. If it's not for you, go find another content site. There's a lot of great content sites out there. If it is for you, it's probably all the way for you because it's probably the site you've been looking for because it's covering DFS from a different angle than what you're seeing elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, obviously I've worked with RotoGrinders for a long time, worked with Adam and Evan on different things. They helped to, get the site off the ground in the early going. Still do a show with RotoGrinders. We've done a lot of stuff with Fantasy Points. I mean, there's so many sites that I have respect for, so many sites that are really great content providers. So I don't think that OWS is for everybody. And I think you guys should check it out. If it's not for you, go find something that is for you. But yeah, those of you who it is for you, come join the fam and we'll keep hitting the tops of the leaderboards.
Yeah, and if you do just want to sample it, you can always use just the generic promo code Pete to get 20% off a weekly pass if you just want to poke around and not necessarily put a ring on it. If you are ready to expand, though, I would recommend taking advantage of that extra 10% off with Pete 30. That'll get you the full 30% off rest of season, the content over there at OWS. Jam, it's been a pleasure as always here. Thank you guys again for hanging out in the chat. Like I said, I'll be going live here in 15 minutes with the Badge Bros for some underdog specific strategy for week 6. Any parting shots for you, Jam, before we get out of here?
I will be recording the Angles podcast next. So if you're an OWS subscriber, you'll be able to access that in the next couple hours. If you're not an OWS subscriber, that goes up on the 1 week season podcast feed and YouTube channel around 8 p.m. Eastern, I think. Maybe it's 5 p.m. Eastern. I'm not sure. But yeah, you'll be able to find that later today. So that's next for me. And I'll be back here next week as well.
All right, guys, we will see you then. Good luck in week 6 to you, to your moms, to anyone else in your family playing DFS. We'll see you guys next time on the Block Party.